B'siyata d'shmai, we're going to learn Rosh Hashanah Daf. We're going to start 10 lines from the top of the Amud. We're going to continue the halachas of Bal Ta'achir, of not delaying bringing korbanos and paying our duties in the various halachas that we're in the middle of discussing. Says the Gemara, Tonu Rabbanon Abraisa. And this is based on a posuk. The posuk says, Moitzos fosecho tishmer. What comes out of your mouth, you should heed, you should keep. V'osiso kashen odarto, you should do as you have vowed, L'Hashem elikecho, nedova shedibarto beficha. The commitment to give a nedova, to give something to the Beis Hamikdash, asher dibarto beficha, that you have spoken with your mouth. And the Gemara is going to learn from the words in this pasuk a number of halachas. Says the Gemara, says the Brisa, moitze sfosecha. From those two words, moitze sfosecha, the words that come out of your mouth, zo mitzvah saseh. It makes sense that the words moitze sfosecha is telling us, do what you've committed yourself to do. This is a mitzvah aseh, to bring your korbanos at the first opportunity when you can. Tishmer, when the pasuk says moitzes vasecha tishmer, the word tishmer is teaching us zu mitzvahs lo yisaseh, is telling us, we know that very often shmira is to guard from transgressing. So the word tishmer means don't delay. It's to make sure not to transgress, and to teach us that if you do delay, you've transgressed an avera. And then the pasuk continues v'osiso kashen odarto. From the word v'osiso seems to mean that you better just. The Gemara says, as hora lebezdin, this is a warning to bezdin, sheye'asucha, that they should force a person to bring the korbanos and the things he's committed himself to bring, that bezdin can force him to do that. Kasher nodarto, the next words in the pasuk, kasher nodarto, zeneder. That's what the word means. Kasher nodarto, what you have vowed, and that is talking about typical nedorim. L'Hashem elikecha, from the words L'Hashem elikecha, which seem to be superfluous. Why do we have to add those two words here? So it must be teaching us that it's something which is mandatory, something you have to do for Hashem. And what are those? Eilu chatois, the korban chatos, v'ashomis, the korban asham, oilois shlomim, and those oilois and shlomim which are choivo, like oilas re'iyah, and shalmei, and the shalmei chagiga. Nedova, the extra word in the pasuk nedova, what is that teaching us? Kamashmoy, it's telling us exactly that. Nedovas, not only nedorim, as we saw from the word nodarto, but also nedovas. The exact difference between a neder and a nedova we've already seen before, and we're going to see later. It depends on how the person has committed himself. If he made his commitment by saying, Harei zu, I'm committing myself to bring this animal to the Beis Hamikdash, or Harei olai, I'm making a commitment on myself to bring an animal. That's the difference between a neder and a nedova. And the last words in the pasuk, almost asher nodarta, from the words asher nodarta, asher dibarta, the words asher dibarta, that which you have spoken. Elu koche bedek habayis. Those are things that you've committed, not necessarily korbanos, but things that you have committed to bring to the Beis Hamikdash, to the treasury of the Beis Hamikdash. It's called bedek habayis. Those things are sold and then used. The money is used for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. The last word in the pasuk, beficha. Beficha zutzdaka. It's an extra word. Why does it have to say the word beficha? It's telling us it's referring to tzedakah. That a person who commits himself or pledges himself to give tzedakah is also included in this bracket of a mitzvah saseh, of moitzos vasecha, and a mitzvah lo saseh, of tishmer, etc. So that's the end of the brayso. Now the Gemara is going to discuss it. Omar mar, moitzos vasecha zu mitzvah saseh. We just saw in the brayso that from the words moitzos vasecha teaches us that there's a positive commandment to bring your commitments, to bring your korbanis on time, when at the first opportunity. Asks the Gemara normally, why do I need to learn it from the words moitzos vasecha? We all remember, and we've seen this already a couple of times. We saw it on Daf Daled Amud Beis, that we learned from a pasuk, that in one pasuk it says, Uvasa Shama, you're going to come to the Beis Hamikdash. And the next pasuk starts, Vehevesem Shama, and you will bring to the Beis Hamikdash your korbanos. And the Gemara says that, Mi Uvasa Shama, Vehevesem Shama Nafka, we saw in Daf Daled, we learned from there, that even though there's a machlokes at what point you've transgressed the lo yisaseh of Bal Ta'achir, but the mitzvah saseh, everybody agrees, is the first opportunity, the first Yom Tov, after you've made your commitment, you have to bring the korbanos. That's what the mitzvah is. So we learn it from Uvasa Shama Vavesem Shama. So why do I need to learn it from Moitzos Vasecha? And another question asks the Gemara, Tishmoir zu mitzvahs lo yisaseh, when we learn out from this pasuk that from the word Tishmoir is telling us that if you don't bring your korbanos, you will transgress lo yisaseh, lomoli. Why do I need this pasuk? Milo yisa'achir l'shalmei nafka. We already learned that in a different pasuk. We saw it a number of times already. Kisidor neder l'Hashem elikecha, lo yisa'achir l'shalmei, kidor shidurshenu Hashem elikecha me'imoch v'hoyo v'chachet. We learned about that pasuk extensively. So we learn it from the regular pasuk of Bal Ta'achir. Why lo yisa'achir? Why do I need the word Tishmoir for that? V'osisa. Another question, says the Gemara, that when it says in the pasuk v'osisa, what did we learn from there in the Brisa? As hara lebeis din sheya'asucha, that there's to tell us that Beis Din can force you to bring your korbanos that you've committed yourself to bring. Asks the Gemara, Lomali, why do I need to learn it from here? Miyakriv oisoi nafka. The Tanya, we learned in a Brisa elsewhere in Shas from a different pasuk. The pasuk says, Ki im elamokim. No, sorry. The pasuk says, Im oilo korbonoi min abokor zochor tomim yakrivenu el pesach oil moed yakriv oisoi lirtsoinoi lifnei Hashem. So the Brisa says, what's the extra words yakriv oisoi coming to tell us? Melamed shekoifen oisoi, to teach us that you force a person, yakriv oisoi, make sure that the korbanos this person has promised to bring and has to bring, that he brings them. Yochel bal korchoi. The Brisa there continues and says, would you entertain the idea that you can even force him? And this doesn't really matter. It doesn't make sense really, because you just said koifin. You just said now that you force him. How can you say I force him, but don't think you can do it bal korchoi? No, you can't. Talmud Loimer, because in that very same pasuk it says liratzoinai, it has to be coming from a desire to bring a korban. How do we reconcile these two words in the psukim? On the one hand, from yakriv oisai, we force him to bring the korban. On the other hand, liratzoinai, you have to want to bring the korban. And here the Gemara says, koifin oisai achoi. We force him until he says, I want to. And the words of the Rambam are known, that the Rambam explains this elsewhere, where the Rambam says deep down, every single Yid wants to do what's right, wants to do the mitzvahs, doesn't want to do Averos. Sometimes we have a Yetzer Hara, it's hard for us. So the Beis Din are allowed to punish him a little bit, just in order to knock away the Yetzer Hara. And when he says, I want to, it's not just I feel forced to because you're hitting me. No, I'm tuning into a deep down desire to bring my korbanos and to do what Hashem wants me to do. But either way, the Gemara is asking, why do I need to learn that from the pasuk of va'osisa, that we force a person to bring his korbanos? We just learned it out in a different brisa from Yakriv Oisei. Answers the Gemara all these three questions in one go. Chad de Omar v'loy afrish, Chad afrish v'loy akriv. Because when it comes to bringing a korban, or bringing, let's call it nedarim nedavis, then there's two stages. First, there's the commitment. I've made a commitment, and now I need to bring it. Stage 2, take the animal, make it into a korban. Stage 3, take this korban to the Beis Hamikdash and do with it what you're supposed to do with it. So we have here a number of stages. So we have one pasuk for a scenario where Omar v'loy afrish, this person says, I am committing myself to bring this korban, but he hasn't yet separated the korban. So that's one pasuk to tell us that there's a mitzvah to say to do it straight away, there's a lo yisaseh if you don't do it, and we can force you. V'chad, and the other pasuk is afrish v'lo yakriv. If a person separated the animal already, he hasn't yet brought it to the Beis Hamikdash, then we have another pasuk to say there's a mitzvah to bring it as soon as you can. There's an aveira if you don't, if you leave it too long, and we can force you. Utzricha, there's a necessity to teach us both in both of those cases. De'ishminon Omar v'lo afrish, because if you're going to say there's a mitzvah to bring the korban and an aveira if you don't, if you were we only to have one pasuk, and we would learn out from Omar v'lo afrish, that's only talking about a case where he committed himself, but he hasn't yet separated the animal. That's because he didn't keep his word. He made a commitment to make an animal a korban, and he didn't do it. So we can understand there's an aveira for that. But if you made it into a korban, he just hasn't brought it to the Beis Hamikdash, we could suggest and say, anywhere this animal is, it's, so to speak, in the treasures, it's in the property belonging to the Beis Hamikdash, wherever it is, it belongs to Hashem, it belongs to Hekdesh. And therefore, maybe once you've made it into the korban, maybe we wouldn't have this pasuk. There wouldn't be the aveira etc. Tzricha. That's why we need a separate pasuk. And if there was a pasuk just to tell us for a case of afrish v'lo yakriv, that it's bad if you've separated the animal and you don't actually bring it as a korban, the komashi legabe. There we can understand, because there's an issue. You have a korban here. Don't keep it in your home, in your own property. Take it to the Beis Hamikdash where it belongs. But in a case where he just said, I'm going to bring a korban, he hasn't actually made it into a korban yet, I may have thought, Dibura loy klumu. So he said, but that's not enough to make him become he'll transgress the Aveira if he doesn't bring it quick enough. Tzricha, that's why I need a pasuk for that as well. Asks the Gemara, Umimotis omras, the omar v'le afrish. How can you say that one of these psukim is talking about that he just committed himself to say, to bring a korban, but he didn't actually separate the korban, he didn't dedicate the animal for the korban yet? How can you say that? How can you entertain such an idea? The pasuk is talking, amongst other things, also about a nedova. Now, what is a nedova? Utnan, we learned in the Mishnah in Masechet Kinin, Eizeu neder. What's the definition of a neder? Ha'omer harei olai oilo. If somebody just makes a commitment and says, I am committed to dedicate an animal, but he hasn't actually done that. Ve'ezehu nedova. What's the definition of a nedova? Ha'omer harei zu oilo. When you point at this animal and you say, this animal I am dedicating as a korban, then that is called a nedova. And the truth is that the question of the Gemara is already here. That how can you say that the pasuk's talking about nedova, and if it's talking about nedova, it's saying harezu, it's saying this animal. This animal means not only oimer, but oimer v'afresh. Because if it's oimer v'loy afresh, if he just said, but he didn't dedicate the korban yet, then that's not a nedova, that's a neder. And since the psukim are talking about nedova, how can it be that the pasuk is talking about oimer v'loy afrish? And by the way, the Gemara brings the end of the Mishnah, ma bein neder lenedova. What's the halachic ramification? What's the difference between a neder and a nedova? That neder, in the case of neder, where the person says harei olai, the commitment is on me to bring the korban, then if the animal died or nignav or got stolen, chayev b'achriyuso, you're responsible to replace it. However, nedova, where all I said was I'm committing this animal, I'm dedicating this animal as a korban, then if mesa or nedova, if it dies or gets stolen, chayev b'achriyuso, I don't need to be responsible to replace it, because I didn't say I'm going to bring an animal no matter what. I said this animal. Well, this animal's gone, so there's nothing to do. So that's what the Gemara is asking. How can you assume that one of these psukim is talking about Omar v'loy afrish when it's clearly talking about a nedova, and a nedova is an animal which is afrish? Omar Rava. Rava says, I'll tell you a case of nedova, but we haven't got this issue. That means even though it's got some characteristics of a nedova, but nonetheless it's possible to be Omar v'loy afrish. How can Omar v'loy afrish be a nedova if nedova means hareizu? The answer is that the real truth is that when it says nedova, it means harei olai. But that's a neder. The pasuk's also talking about nedova. No. What it means is when we have a neder which is similar to a nedova. How can we have a nedova style neder? Because what's unique about the nedova? What's unique about the nedova is that you don't hold responsibility to replace it. A neder, normally you have responsibility because you said harei olai, the commitment is on me, not on the animal, on this particular animal. What happens if a person says, I'm making a commitment to bring a korban, but he's saying, but I'm on condition that if that korban gets lost or stolen, that I won't have to replace it. So he's like said a neder, but he's conditioned the neder that it should have the same halachic ramifications of a nedova. That's the nedova we're talking about here. So it's possible to be an Omar v'loy afrish, that he just said and didn't separate the korban. So of course it's really a neder, but it's called a nedova because it's referring to a case where a person made a condition that it would have the same halachas as a nedova, even though it's a neder. Kegoin de Omar harei olai oilo. He said, I'm committing myself to bring an oila. He hasn't yet dedicated the animal, so really it's a neder. But al manos she'eni chayev b'achriyusa, on condition that I'm not taking responsibility for it if it gets stolen or dies, and therefore it's similar to nedova, and that's the nedova that the pasuk is referring to. Beficha zu tzedakah. The final halacha we learned from this pasuk that from the word beficha, that you've got to keep what you say from your mouth, it's referring to somebody who pledges tzedakah. Omar Rava. Tzedakah, Rava said that tzedakah mechayev alol alter. As far as tzedakah is concerned, it's not dependent on Yomim Tovim. It's dependent as soon as you make your commitment, there's poor people around, immediately there's a mitzvah to give it to the poor people. My time. Why would that be true? Because the people are here. The poor people are standing in front of you. Give it to them. Karbonos, I can understand. You have to go all the way to Yerushalayim to take it to Yerushalayim. You only go to Yerushalayim for the Yom Tovim. We can understand. Tzedakah, the poor people are here. Go and give it to them. Says the Gemara Pshita. Is it not self-understood that as soon as you commit yourself to give tzedakah, there's a mitzvah to give the tzedakah, and it's an aveira not to give the tzedakah? Says the Gemara, no. I may have thought, since the Baal Ta'achir, the aveira of not delaying, is said in context of the karbonis, as we've seen in the psukim, I may have thought, that even regarding tzedakah, you only transgress the issa of delaying after 3 Yomim Tovim, karbonis, like the karbonis, komash malon. That's what the Rava was coming to impress on us, that it's not the case. That Hasom, regarding the karbonis, of the commitments of the karbonos mentioned over there in the psukim, we assume that only regarding the karbonos, where you have to come to Yerushalayim, that's when the Torah, that's where we learnt in previous sugyas, that the Torah says you only transgress the aveira after the gimel regalim, after the 3 Yomim Tovim. But in the case of tzedakah, loy, not because aniyim are available, they're here, and therefore you're required immediately to give the tzedakah. Continues the Gemara. Omar Rava. Rava said, and we've seen this already on Daf Daled Amud Beis somewhat, that kivan she'ovar alav regel echad, even though we know that to transgress the Baal Ta'achir, it's only after 3 regalim. We saw it's a machlekes in previous sugyas, but that's how we're assuming now. However, says Rava, the mitzvah, the aveira, if you don't do it, will only be after 3 Yomim Tovim. The mitzvah is at the first regel. Regel echad over ba'aseh. If you didn't bring the korban the first Yom Tov after you committed yourself, you've transgressed the mitzvah's aseh of bringing the korban. The mitzvah aseh that we learnt out from, well, the Gemaras before, we learnt out from Uvasa Shama Ve'esim Shama, as we've seen. Asks the Gemara against Rav Meisi, we're going to ask from a Mishnah. Hey, Rabbi Yeshua Rav Pupais. These 2 Chachomim, they testified, al Vlad Shlomim. Vlad Shlomim means that a person, he dedicated a pregnant animal as a Shlomim, or he made a non-pregnant animal into a Shlomim and then it became pregnant. That's considered a Vlad Shlomim, the child born from a mother that was a Shlomim. Sheyikrav Shlomim. The child also, this child that was born from the Shlomim has the same status as a Shlomim. And Omer of Popais testified, Ani meid shehoisalonu poro shel zivchei Shlomim. We had a cow which was a Shlomim, v'achalnua b'Pesach. We ate it on Pesach. It came Pesach, and we brought it as a korban over Pesach. V'achalnu v'loda. However, the child that was born from this cow, obviously before it was shechted on Pesach, was Shlomim. When was that offered as a Shlomim? B'chag, only on Sukkot, 6 months later. So the Gemara says, what's going on here? Bishleima b'Pesach. I can understand on Pesach that you didn't want to shecht that animal, lo yakravua, you didn't bring it as a Shlomim, the child. Eimer de mechusos manhava. We know that a korban can only be shechted if it's after the 8th day from when it was born, from the 8th day and on, and therefore it could be that over Pesach that this animal was not yet ready to be brought as a korban. Elovloda ba'atzeres heichamashilo. But how could you keep this child all the way till? How could you keep it all the way to Sukkot? Well, in between Pesach and Sukkot, you've got Shavuos. How could you not bring it on Shavuos? V'ovri olei ba'aseh. According to what you, Rava, said, that the first Yom Tov that you can bring an animal and you don't, you transgress the mitzvahs aseh. Well, this child of a Shlomim whose mother was shechted on Pesach, why did you not bring the child already Shavuos? It's a Shlomim. Answers the Gemara, Omer of Zvid Mishmei de Rava. Zvid said in the name of Rava, Kegoyin Shehoya choyle. We're talking about that this child of the Shlomim was sick, and we know it's a Mishnah in Masechet Rosh Daf Mem Aleph that an animal which is a choyle is not allowed to be brought, is possible to be brought as a korban. So it was a choyle on Atzeres over Shavuos, so you couldn't bring it. By the time Sukkot came along, it was well, and they could bring it as a korban. Rav Ashi answers, V'ochalnu v'lodo shlomim b'chag diktoni chag ha-sukkos. What does it say over there in the Mishnah? He testified that they ate the child on the chag. We assumed chag to mean Sukkot. And he had a good question. What happened to Shavuos? He says, you know what chag means? Chag means a Yom Tov. Which Yom Tov? Yom Tov of Shavuos. Indeed, they ate the animal on Shavuos. Ve'edoch, Reb Zvid, in the name of Rava, who didn't answer that, he answered that the animal must have been sick. He held, Kol heicha d'tani Pesach, wherever Pesach is mentioned in context, then when we speak about Shavuos in similar context, Tani Atzeres, then Shavuos is called Atzeres, it's not called Chag. And since the Mishnah says that the mother was shechted Pesach, and doesn't say the child was shechted Atzeres, it says the child was shechted Chag, we assume it to mean Sukkos, and therefore the question comes back, what happened to Shavuos? And that's what Reb Zvid said in the name of Rava, the child must have been sick over Shavuos. Continues the Gemara, Omar Rava, Kivan she'ovru olav gimel regalim. Rava says that till now we've learned that after 3 Yomim Tovim are over and you didn't bring your korbanos, you've transgressed the Aveira of Baal Ta'achir. Says Rava, but not just as a one-off. B'chol yom v'yom over Baal Ta'achir, every single day. From after the 3 Yomim Tovim, every single day you're transgressing the Aveira of not delaying. Asks the Gemara Meisvei. We're going to ask from a Braisa. Echod b'choir ve'echod kol hakochim. Either a b'choir, where there's a mitzvah to bring it as a korban, the b'choir of a Torah animal, to bring as a korban in the Beis HaMikdash within the first year. Or echod kol hakochim, or any of the other korbanos, kivan she'ovru aleim shana b'lo regalim, as soon as a year has passed, they have not yet passed 3 regalim, which doesn't make sense. How do you have a year without 3 Yomim Tovim? We'll discuss that soon. The Gemara is going to discuss that. But if either, says the Mishnah, the Braisa, if either a year has passed, even though 3 Yomim Tovim haven't passed, or regalim, the 3 Yomim Tovim have passed, b'lo yishana, even though a year has not passed, over Baal Ta'achir is transgressed Baal Ta'achir. So you see here in the Braisa is looking to find when are you over Baal Ta'achir. It's either a year without regalim or regalim without a year. And this is a question on Rava. Asks him, I don't understand. What's the question? What about this Braisa is contrary to what Rava said? Omer of Kahana said, Mandu kamoisiv, shape kamoisiv. Whoever asked the question was asking a good question. Why? Mechte Tana alavi kamahadar. This Tana of this Braisa was looking to determine where can one transgress Baal Ta'achir. And he says, I'll find you all the places. It's either a year without the regalim or the regalim without a year. So he's saying, Listen b'chol yom v'yom over Baal Ta'achir. So if you're already looking for every opportunity when Baal Ta'achir would apply, if Rav is right that every day after the time is up, you're over on Baal Ta'achir, say that. Say that every single day once the time is over, from then every single day. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for the Baal Ta'achir. So tell us about it. That was the question of the Gemara. Ve'edoch, and Rava didn't have an issue with it. Why? He says, Tana lemikvei belav kamahadir. The Braisa was just coming to tell us from what point you've transgressed Baal Ta'achir. Belav yasera, but the extra details of all the averos you transgress after that every day, lo kamahadir. That wasn't the topic of the Braisa. The Braisa wasn't looking for that, and therefore it's not a question that it's not in the Braisa. Says the Gemara, coming back to that Braisa, Gufa. Echod b'choir ve'echod kol hakochim, either b'choir or any other kochim, kivan she'ovru aleim shana, if a whole year has passed, b'lo regalim, even though the 3 regalim, the 3 Yomim Tovim haven't passed, or regalim b'lo shana, 3 Yomim Tovim without a year having passed, over Baal Ta'achir, he's transgressed Baal Ta'achir. He's transgressed the Aveira of not delaying. So the Gemara says, Bishlei me regalim b'lo shana, mishkachas lo. It's no problem to find how you have 3 regalim even though a year didn't pass. Because as soon as 3 regalim have passed, it's not yet a year. It could be it's not yet a year. If a person committed himself to bring a korban on Erev Pesach, then Pesach Shavuos Sukkos, Matzah Sukkos, you've already transgressed the Baal Ta'achir. It's only about 6 months later. And there's no issue with that. That we can understand. Mishkachas lo. How do you find a case where a whole year has passed, and according to this brisa you've transgressed Baal Ta'achir, but 3 Yom Tovim haven't passed? How do you get through 12 months of a year without Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos? Heicha mishkachas lo. So the Gemara says, Honicha lemanda islei kasidron mishkachas lo. We already saw in the Gemara and Daf Daled that there's one opinion that holds that 3 regalim, 3 Yom Tovim is not good enough, that any 3 regalim have passed, irrespective of when you start. It has to be kasidron. It must be first a Pesach, then a Shavuos, then a Sukkos. So if somebody committed himself to bring a korban a day after Pesach, then it's going to be 5 regalim later, because you only start counting from Pesach. So in the meantime, you've got Shavuos, it doesn't count, because it has to be Kasidron, it has to be Pesach first. Sukkos doesn't count. Pesach now starts counting, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos. So you became Chayav after Pesach, and when are the 3 regalim over? A year and a half later after Sukkos. So that's the case. According to that opinion, we can understand that you have a year of 12 months that have passed, even though you haven't yet had your Gimel Regalim, because it needs to be Gimel Regalim Kasidron. So then Mishkachas lo. Elo laman de lesle Kasidron, but according to the opinion that says, as long as 3 Yom Tovim have passed, it doesn't matter which one was first, second, or third, then you've transgressed Baal Ta'achir. Heicha Mishkachas lo. How is that opinion going to understand what the Brisa said, that if you have, not the Brisa, what Rava said, sorry, it's not the Brisa, it's Rava. What Rava said, that how's Rava, according to that opinion, how's Rava going to explain the concept of having a year that's passed without the Gimel Regalim? Says the Gemara. We're now going to come to another machlokas, and this is a machlokas regarding bote or echayma. We're going to learn about this extensively later on in Shas. We're not going into the details now, but there's certain halachas that when a person sells certain properties, then he has 1 year that he can force the buyer to sell it back to the seller. And that's, the pasuk says that he has a v'im lo yigoel ad lo yisloi shono tmima v'kom habayis hashabira shelo yichoymo latzmisus lakoino yisolederosav lo yitzei bayovel. That's a pasuk in the Torah. It's got to be shono tmima, 1 year. There's a machlekes tanoim, how long is a year? So that's how we're going to understand this. Rava said that we have a case of a year without Gimel Regalim. Well, let's see how that can work. How long is a year? According to Rabbi, who says Mishkachas lo b'shana mu'uberes. According to Rabbi, who says that according to Rabbi, in a year which has the extra month, the second Adar, a 13-month year, it's possible to have a year without the Gimel Regalim. How is that possible? The Tanya. We learned in a brisa Shana Tmimo regarding Bote or Ichoimo, when it says in the pasuk a whole year. What's a whole year? Rabbi says Moine Gimel Meis V'Shishim V'Chamisha Yom Minyan Yimoisachamo. Rabbi says a whole year is a solar year of 365 days. That's called a year, no more, no less. So according to Rabbi, in the event that you have a leap year, so you have 2 Adars, so here we can have a case where a whole year has passed, a year, a halachically defined year of 365 days according to Rabbi, and it's still not yet a whole year. For example, if somebody became chayav immediately after Pesach, then when's he going to transgress Gimel Regalim? After the next Pesach, because I only became chayav after Pesach, so we need Shavuos, Sukkos, Pesach. But since it's a leap year, then the leap year is a whole month later. It's more than a regular year, a whole lunar month later than a regular year. It's approximately 19 days more than the 365 days, because a leap year has got, a lunar year has got 354. A leap year is going to have an extra, every year has an extra 11 days to make the 365 days according to Rabbi, but to get to the end of a lunar year, you're going to have not 365 days, you're going to have 354 plus 30. You're going to have 19 days more than the 365. So if so, you're going to have a whole year halachically year of 365 days and you haven't yet reached the next Pesach. The Imnis Abrasha, so that's the Rabbi. The Chacham say no. The Chacham argued the Rabbi and say, Moine Yud Beis Chodesh Miyayim Liyayim. The Chachamim say you look at the lunar year and you say what date you became in the case of the Bati Orei Chayma, you sold it on date X. So this date, the next year, which is on a regular year, is going to be 354 days. In a leap year, it's going to be an extra month after that. Then Moine Yud Beis Chodesh Miyayim Liyayim. That's the end of the year. That's called Shana Tmima. Vim Nis Abra Shana. And if it's a leap year, Nis Abra Loi, then the leap year is in favor of the seller, that he has the extra month with which he can redeem his field back. So Mishkachas Lo Rebbe. So according to Rebbe, we have a case the Akdasha Basar Chagamatzis, that he made a hekdesh after Pesach. The Chimota Shilhi Adar was 365 days later in a leap year. 365 days later is going to be somewhere towards the end of Adar. Basra, Chimota Shili Adar Basra, approximately the end of Adar of that next year, that second Adar, that's it. 365 days are over. Shana Malya, he's had a whole year. Regalim Leimalu, but he hasn't yet had the whole year. The 3 Regalim, because Pesach hasn't yet come round. Elul Rabbanon, according to Rabbanon, who say it's always on the calendar from date to date. Heicha Mishkachas Lo. Then according to those opinions that the Chachomim, who say that a year is from on the lunar calendar from date to date, according to them, you're never ever going to have a case of a year without Gimel Regalim. So how can Rava say if you have Shana B'lei Regalim, according to the opinion that it's not Kasidron, you're never going to have such a case? Answers the Gemara, Kedetoni Reb Shemaya, according to Reb Shemaya, he holds as follows. We learned in the Brayso Reb Shemaya says Atzeres, the Yom Tov of Shavuos. Pa'omim, hey, sometimes it's on the 5th of Sivan. Pa'omim Shisha, sometimes it's on the 6th of Sivan. Pa'omim Shiva, sometimes it's on the 7th of Sivan. Ha'ketzad, what does it depend on? It depends on whether we know that every month could be a full month or a not full month, a mole or a chosar. Every month on the lunar year is either 29 days long or 30 days long. When is Pesach? Pesach is on the 15th of Nisan. When is Shavuos? Always 50 days later. We know that, 50 days later. So let's work it out. If Nisan is 30 days, then you've got from the 16th of Nisan till the 30th of Nisan, you have 15 days. If Iyar is also Mole, also 30 days, then you have 30 days in Iyar. And then altogether, you have the 15th of Nisan, the 30th of Iyar, you've got 45. 5 days later is the 50th. 50th day must be the 5th of Sivan. If Nisan and Iyar are 29 days, are both Chosar, so in Nisan you're going to have from the 16th till the 29th, you've only got 14 days. Iyar is also going to be Chosar, it's also 29 days. So if you have the 19 in Nisan and the 29 in Iyar, you're short of 7. So to make up 50. So the 7th of Sivan will be Shavuos. If either Nisan or Iyar is Mole and the other one is Chosar, one of them is 29, the other one is 30. So together then together between the two, you're going to have 49. You have 44 days altogether. 44 days. You can work it out because if either way it works out. If one is Mole, one is Chosar, then from the 16th of Nisan to the end of Iyar, whichever way you hold it is 44 days. You're short of 6 days to get to the 50th day. That's Vav Sivan. So that's what the Gemara is now going to explain to us. Ketzad, Ketzad, Shnei Meleim. If both Nisan and Iyar are 30-day months, Chamisha, then Shavuos is going to be on the 5th day of Sivan. Shneim Chaserim, if they're both 29 days, Shiva, then Shavuos is going to be on the 7th of Sivan. Echad Mole, Echad Chosar, if either Nisan or Iyar are Mole and the other one is Chosar, then Shisha is going to be on the 6th of Sivan. So now let's work it out. What happens if in 1 year Shavuos was on the 5th of Sivan, and on the 6th of Sivan this person made an eder to bring a korban? So now starts his year. When's his year going to be over? We said according to this opinion of the Chachomim, that it's Moina Yud Beis Chodesh Miyom Liyom, then on the 6th of Sivan next year, the year is over. But Shavuos on that next year might be on the 7th of Sivan. So we have a whole year from date to date, from Vav Sivan to Vav Sivan, and nonetheless, you haven't reached your Shavuos yet. So that is the answer of the Gemara. Uman Tan asks the Gemara, the Palig Alei de Rav Shemai, who is the opinion who argues with Rav Shemaya, and he holds that you only ever have a case of regolim below shana, but you don't have a case ever of shana below regolim. Who holds of such a thing? Answers the Gemara, Acherim, it's Acherim, the Tani we learned in the Brisa. Acherim oimrim, ein bein atzeres la'atzeres, ein bein Rosh Hashanah Rosh Hashanah ela daled yomim bilvad. There's another opinion of Acherim who holds that we don't, sometimes this one's mole, sometimes this one's mole, and therefore Shavuos will sometimes be on this day, sometimes on this day. No. According to Acherim, that can never happen. Every single year is exactly one mole, one chosa. All the months. 30-29, 30-29, that's how it goes round. That's how you get to your 354 days of every lunar year. And therefore the difference between a certain date one year and the same date the next year is always going to be 4 days ahead, because in 354 days you're always going to have X amount of full weeks plus 4 days, and therefore it's always going to be the difference between one Atzeres, one Shavuos, and the next is always 4 days in the week. The difference between one Rosh Hashanah and the next is always 4 days in the week. So you're never going to have a case of Vav Sivan 1 year is after Shavuos and the next year is before Shavuos. In a leap year where you've got you have an extra month, and the extra month is always a 29-day year. A 29-day year always has 4 full weeks plus 1 day. 28 days is 4 full weeks plus 1 day, which means everything gets pushed on by 1 day. So in a leap year, the difference between one Shavuos and the next, one Rosh Hashanah and the next, won't be 4 days of the week, it'll be 5 days of the week. But those are the opinions who argue with Rav Shemaya. And now the Gemara is going to ask a few more questions regarding Baal Ta'achir. Boy, Reb Zera asked the following question. Yerush, if somebody inherited a commitment from his father, Ma'u b'Baal Ta'achir, he's got this animal that his father committed to bring. Is he going to transgress the Aveira of delaying if he doesn't bring it? So what are the two sides of the question? It's as follows. In the Pasuk it says, Kisidoyer neder l'Hashem elikecha. If you committed yourself to bring you made a vow or shvur to bring a korban to the Beis Hamikdash, then leisa acher l'shalma, don't delay in bringing it. So maybe kisidoyer neder Omer Achmona, the Torah is only addressing somebody who made the neder, who made the commitment. V'holoi nodar, and this child, he inherited the commitment. The animal has to be brought, but he didn't make the commitment. Maybe the Aveira doesn't apply to him. Or Dilmo, maybe not. Maybe Uvasa Shama Vevesim Shama. Whoever is incumbent upon him to bring the korban is the one who's going to be transgressed. The same way as the mitzvah to bring it from Vevesa of Uvasa Shama Vevesim Shama. There it doesn't say Kisider Neder. There the son of this person that died has to bring it, and for the mitzvah, maybe the same will apply to the Aveira, that whoever gets the mitzvah for bringing it on time, gets the Aveira for not bringing it on time. And this child is chayev to bring the korban. That was the question of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, I'll prove it to you, Tashema, the Tanya Rabbi. Rabbi learned in a Brisa that the Pasuk says, and we've seen this Pasuk a number of times, Kisider neder Hashem elikecha, lo yisa'acher l'shalma kidori shidrushenu Hashem elikecha, mei imoch v'haya b'chachet. Mei imoch means from your people. Not all of them. It means some. Prat, to exclude the Yerush. Somebody who's a Yerush, who inherited he's an heir, he inherited this animal, this commitment, and to him, he's not included in this pasuk, he's excluded. Says the Gemara, you're learning from Me'imoch that to exclude a Yerush? V'hai Me'imoch mi'boilei. We'll all remember, we learned on Daf Yomi Shiur that from the word Me'imoch we learn, Zeh leket shikcha v'peah, that there's matnui saniyim called leket shikcha and peah, which is different stalks that are left in the field and have to be left in the field, that have to be left for the poor people. And they are also included in this topic of not delaying. We've discussed it previously, and we learned it from Me'imoch. So how can you now say from Me'imoch you're learning to exclude from Baal Ta'achir a Yerush? You can learn two things from one word. Says the Gemara, yes. Kori be imoch v'kori bei me'imoch. From the imoch part of me'imoch, we learn the matnos aniyim. From the me'imoch, which is a type of exclusion, from the extra mem, we're learning that the pasuk of Baal Ta'achir, which is this pasuk, Lo Ta'achir, is excluding somebody. Who's it excluding? The Yerush. And now we're going to ask another question. Abzera asks another question. Boyer Abzera. Isha mahi b'Baal Ta'achir. A woman that makes a commitment to bring a korban and she doesn't bring it, has she transgressed Baal Ta'achir? What's the question? The question is as follows. Mi omrinon, do we say, Holoi mechayve b'riyah? When do you transgress Baal Ta'achir? When there's 3 regalim, 3 yomim tovim, and you have to come to the Beis HaMikdash, uvasa shama v'veisim shama. You've got to come to the Beis HaMikdash to be oile regel. Bring your korbanos then, and if you don't, at some point you'll have transgressed the Avera. A woman is not chayiv to come to the Beis HaMikdash to be oile regel. Oidilma, or maybe, no. Maybe ha'isa b'simcha. It's true she doesn't need to come to the Beis HaMikdash, but she does have to be in Yerushalayim in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. There was a mitzvah to be glad and happy over Yom Tov by eating the korbanos. We learn out from the Psukim in Psochim Daf Kuf Tes that Bizman sheBeis HaMikdash Kayim ein simcha ela b'basa shlomim shene'ema v'zavachta shlomim v'achalta sham. So the woman is chayev in Simchas Yom Tov. And maybe she's she's included in the bracket of eating korbanos on Yom Tov. Maybe she has to bring her korbanos then. That was the question of Abzera. Omale Abaya. Abaya is going to answer that. But typically, do'isa b'simcha. Abaya says you can assume that since she's chayav in simcha, she's in the bracket of Baal Ta'achir. Says the Gemara, Mi Omar Abaya hocha. Abaya seriously said this. V'Omar Abaya isha bailo mesamcha. Does it not say that a woman doesn't need to come to eat the basa shlomim to have simcha in Yerushalayim? No. When the Gemara says that a husband should just buy fancy clothes for his wife, and that's how she'll be happy on Yom Tov, and she doesn't need to come and eat the basa shlomim. Says the Gemara, Lidvar of the Reb Zera Kamar, it's true. Abaye himself, he says that there's no simcha. Reb Zera himself, who entertained both stadim. Number 1, a woman is not chayev to come to the Beis HaMikdash, but number 2, she is chayev to eat korbanos. So Rabbi said, you Reb Zera, you hold the woman has to come and eat the korbanos in Yerushalayim, then according to you, assume that she's chayev on Baal Ta'achir. Continues the Gemara, another question. Interesting question. We know that a b'choyer has to be brought within a year. It's whenever the b'choyer, the firstborn of this kosher animal, is born, then it's got the firstborn is brought as a korban to the Beis HaMikdash. It's a b'choyer, and we have to bring it. The mitzvah is to bring it within the first year. However, there's a halacha that one cannot bring a korban immediately when it's born. It's got to wait till the 8th day. The question is, when do we start counting the year? From when it's born, or from the 8th day, when you could first bring it to the Beis HaMikdash? Only from there you have a year. From what point do we count the year? Omar Abaya, Mishosha Noilad. Abaya said, from when it's born. Why not? A year is a year, from when it's born. Ravacha Bayakiv Omar, no. From the point where it's now fit to be able to be used on the Mizbeach to appease or whatever this korban is doing, but it's for haratzah. That's what ritzui, to be desired by Hashem on the Beis HaMikdash, in the Beis HaMikdash on the Mizbeach as a korban. Then only from that point, which is from day 8. V'loi pligi, the Gemara says, Abaya and Rabacha Bayakiv are not actually arguing. Ha betam, that when Rabacha Bayakiv said that it's only from day 8, is talking about an unblemished animal. It's a whole animal. And whole animal can indeed be brought as a korban. And since it can be brought as a korban, then only from the point that it can be brought as a korban, that from that point on, you start counting the year. However, a balmum, which was born with a mum, and is not going to be shechted as a korban on the Mizbeach, then since it's not going to actually be shechted as a korban on the Mizbeach, then there's no need to start counting from day 8. We can start counting the year from when it's born. Asks the Gemara, you're suggesting that a Baal Mum, which indeed it's not going to be a korban on the Mizbeach, but mimotzi ochile, are you saying that you can eat it? That means you can shecht it and eat it from when it's born? How can you do that? We know there's a halacha, and this is discussed elsewhere in Shas, that, and we saw this in Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Hey, that for the first 8 days from when an animal is born, we don't yet know if it's a nefel or not. And if it's a nefel, which means it's going to, so to speak, die, and then for all intents and purposes, it's going to become apparent that it was a nevela, it was counted for dead, and you're not allowed to eat it. So the first 8 days, in any case, you can't eat it. So why would you count it from when it was born? Says the Gemara, no, the kimle bei shekolu lo chadoshov. The whole issue of having to wait the 8 days to make sure it's not a nefel, that it doesn't die as soon as it's born within the first few days, is only when it didn't come full term. And for different animals, the full term is a different amount of time. It's discussed in others Masechtos and Jas. But if we know on an absolute level that this animal was kolu lo chadoshov, we can assume that it was kolu lo chadoshov, that it was full term. There's no reason in the world to suspect that it would be a nefil, and therefore, indeed, immediately on the day it was born, one is allowed to shecht it and eat it, and therefore the year of time within which one has to do that gets counted from when it's born, as Abaya said, mishor shenoilad. And in Yitzchok in the next year, we're going to continue from here.